knowing as we do so that we return over and over again to the truth of our being. We breathe again and just, become aware of the feeling of peace and happiness that we have right here. The knowingness that everything is unfolding in order, that our lives have been lived the way that they were meant to be lived for the lessons that we have chosen to learn. And we are willing to change our hearts and our minds for those lessons to be easy ones, full of grace. We are willing to let go of judgments and errors in thinking and just trust again that as we follow the flow of life, the divine order of life, God's will in our lives, we can indeed find the peace. We breathe again in and out and rest in this moment, knowing we are grateful. Our hearts are filled with gratitude, and we gently return to this room, feeling the joy that we have as we share together in our divine wisdom, our divine love, and grace. So you may open your eyes if you're ready. Just look around the room and be so thrilled to see all the souls that fill this room, all the people we're so grateful for. Thank you. Thank you. It is so. Amen. So as usual, I have about 15 books. I found it's always challenging for me sometimes to get ready to do a talk. And will, for some reason, has been a hard one. I don't think I've done too many talks about will. That may be why. But I thought, Janet Murdoch's song, I'm Willing to Listen, always comes to me when I think about will. And so I looked up a little bit about will. I looked in 12 Powers books and 12 Power meditation books, and I looked at will and in a couple of different places. But I also looked at prosperity, because the word for today is prosperity. And that's another one that I've sometimes had trouble with Unity's focus and teachings on prosperity. But I thought it was really interesting. One of the first things that came to me was from A Course in Miracles. And that lesson is God's will for me is perfect happiness. God's will for me is perfect happiness. Now, if that's God's will for me, wouldn't that also mean prosperity? A willingness to enjoy the bounty of life? So I decided, I guess that's the direction I'm supposed to take to this Sunday. God's will for me is perfect happiness, which can also mean prosperity. Ed Rabel, a well-known Unity teacher, minister, said, the only use any of us had to make of our human will is to surrender it to God. The only use of our human will is to surrender it to God. And then from Metaphysics 2, Will is the decision-making, directing, choosing faculty of the mind. It is our capacity to say yes or no to opportunities and options. The highest expression of will is willingness, our conscious consent to the will of God. Willingness, our conscious consent to doing the will of God. So one of the prosperity teachings early on taught us that, we can say all we want to about prosperity, but if we're keeping our fists closed, holding on like this, it's pretty hard to receive any good that comes into our lives. So when we're clenching our fists and holding tight to false beliefs in particular, holding tight to our money because we're so afraid we're not going to get any more, then it's really hard to let the flow of life work in you and through you. So again, that's why I was just so thrilled with Nancy's talk last week about the flow of life. Unity's prosperity teachings began very early on with Charles Fillmore's book on prosperity. And then there was another book written by Georgiana Tree West's Prosperity's 10 Commandments. And I'd ask Jeff to make a slide of the 10 Commandments. Prosperity's affirmations. I look only to God for my prosperity. I make no mental images of lack. I speak no words of limitation. I let go and let God work in my affairs. I deal honorably with God and all his pay clerks. So I thought these first 5 were pretty interesting because they mirror the first part of prosperity teachings as they were written down later, which is always to put God first in our affairs. And I, in particular, realized that early on as I was working with prosperity, that when I was holding on tight to my money and I was grumbling about people overcharging me or people who expected me to pay when after all I, didn't have the money to pay them. Why should they expect to be paid? Or even just focusing on one of my big problems was paying my utility bills. I hate to say that, but for some reason I was really unhappy with Montana Power and felt like they were, a major corporation out to gouge me. And so that bill would get put to the bottom of the pile, and not a good practice. But as I learned prosperity teachings, I started trying to bless Montana Power. I started trying to think of my utility payment as a blessing, that this was my way of blessing all the people I knew that worked at Montana Power. I was blessing the ability to turn on my lights anytime I wanted to have a refrigerator that kept my food cold, to have a freezer, to have a furnace, and to realize that it was through this company that I'd had so many upsets about mental thoughts and criticisms that my life is just filled with abundance. And so it got easier to pay my Montana Power bill. And I want to tell you, boy, last week or 2 weeks ago when we didn't have power, for a few days, sometimes a week for a few of us, it became obvious what a blessing that is in our lives. And so I deal honorably with God and all his pay clerks. It's kind of old-fashioned language, but all his pay clerks can certainly mean all the people that we send money out to. Doesn't matter who they are, but we are blessing, we are opening our hands and letting the circulation of money and good flow through us. So that brings us to, I keep my wealth circulating wisely. I use my wealth for good purposes only, and I never strive to get something for nothing. Again, we're dealing honorably with our money, with our resources. I never talk poverty. I tell the truth about God's abundance. And finally, I take my eye off my neighbor's wealth. I claim my own. So there we are. 10 prosperity affirmations. Kind of old-fashioned language, some of it. It was updated later on by Edwene Gaines. She wrote a book. Guess I left that one home because I didn't want to carry too many books. But Edwene Gaines is a great prosperity teacher. I think she's still with us. Janet Murdoch, my friend who wrote the I'm Willing to Listen book, really adored Edwene Gaines and followed Edwene Gaines's teachings, sometimes to her detriment, I felt, in my judgmental state. Because Janet was one of those people who didn't look very prosperous. In fact, Janet looked poverty-stricken. She lived on a very limited income, disability income. She had a condition that made it really hard for her to move fast. And yet she was able to write incredible songs, adapt music, do just amazing goodness out in the world. And the teaching that she really grabbed a hold of from Edwene Gaines was another one that I had trouble with, and that was tithing. How many of you like the word tithing? Well, maybe one, maybe. It had such a negative connotation to me. Boy, the way the church could steal your money, but making you feel guilty about, that's about having any money, you had to give it to the church. And who knew what the church was doing with it, right? You can see I had to do a lot of adjustments in my thoughts. But Janet she decided tithing. That's Edwene Gaines' first law, is you must tithe. And if you're feeling poor, you must tithe to the nth. And Janet started, she played piano at Mammoth Bakery once a week, and she would set her little donation basket on the piano and play during the lunch hour. And she played all kinds of songs, and people would put money in the donation basket. And sometimes she'd get $10 and sometimes she'd get $2. But whatever she got, she immediately took 10% of that and put it in a separate envelope. And that was to be her tithe. And she tithed immediately after she got her notification that her disability income check had come in, was in her bank account. Anything she got, she tithed on. Well, the little secret that Edwene Gaines said that made me change my mind about tithing was that you tithed to where you were spiritually fed. You didn't tithe to Unity Church. You didn't tithe to some other big church, mega church. You tithed to where you were spiritually fed. And if that happened to be Joe Blow at the Conoco station who washed your windshield for you without being asked, you could tithe to him. You could tithe wherever you felt like tithing. And that was because that's where you got fed spiritually that week. You didn't have to tithe, but it helped you open yourself to the flow. That was just, it was so eye-opening to me to realize that this opened me to flow, because when I dedicated my first 10% to God, going back to the idea of opening myself to my higher power, if I tithed my first 10% to where I was spiritually fed, that really changed the flow in my life. It was just amazing to me to hear this. And Janet just, oh, she was the epitome of amazing prosperity, including being given a cruise at one point. And so, she was just so well served in so many respects and was such a great teacher in spite of what her life circumstances looked like. So in Charles Fillmore's book, Prosperity, and he was way before Edwin Gaines, but he ran into controversy too. I had some bones to pick with Edwin Gaines, but then I also had a little bone to pick with Charles Fillmore, because one of the things he says in his book about prosperity is it's a sin to be poor. Can you believe that? Charles Fillmore said it's a sin to be poor. Well, in my old error thinking, I thought, my God, he's pointing the finger at, at poor people. And I'm thinking I want to learn more about Charles Fillmore and Unity. Well, that was not exactly the way Charles Fillmore meant that. Charles Fillmore used the word sin to mean error thinking. So when we are trapped in the idea that it's even possible for us to be poor, we're trapped in error thinking. And error thinking is sin. That's all sin is. It's an error, it's a mistake, and we have the capacity, the ability to change our mind. And I think that's exactly what Janet did all those years ago. She changed her mind about being poor. And she used the money she was given that flowed through her to do incredible good. And Charles went on to say, when we establish ourselves in the consciousness of God, the whole universe moves to flow into us with its abundance of life and substance. When we establish ourselves in the consciousness of God, the whole universe moves to flow into us with its abundance of life and substance. So here again, are we willing to align ourselves with divine will? Are we willing to establish ourselves in the consciousness of God? The other thing that Charles Fillmore said, let me see if I can find it. He reinterpreted the talk about bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Bring your whole tithe into the storehouse, it tells us in the Bible, which again can be so guilt-laden sometimes. But God is saying that this is a commitment to work with law in all aspects of life. God is saying, prove me through your action of bringing your whole tithe. Your whole tithe means more than just monetary. It means going the second mile in meeting obligations, turning the other cheek in relationships, and forgiving until 70 times 7. It means diligence in keeping the high watch of positive thinking and loving reactions. In other words, life is consciousness. So it is foolhardy to suppose that the law can be fulfilled by anything less than a total and broad commitment to achieving higher level consciousness. So this brings up Edwene Gaines's goal again. Besides the tithing and giving as her number 1 step for prosperity, her number 2 step is clear-cut goals. To set clear-cut goals. She said that this entails a 21-day fast, a fast from anger, gossip, and hostility. Only after you have fasted from anger, gossip, and hostility will you recognize that you have good intentions in your heart. And then you can know what it is you truly want. So that's, it's like some concrete steps to prosperity. Number 1, tithing from a happy heart, giving with your whole heart. Then number 2, setting clear-cut goals, fasting from anger and gossip and little hidden barbs that we give sometimes. And then we can realize what it is we truly want. We truly want to be aligned with good and only good in our lives. Edwene's 3rd step is forgiveness. This is Charles Fillmore's step as well. It's forgiveness. The idea of forgiveness runs through all kinds of spiritual teachings, including, of course, A Course in Miracles, which uses forgiveness over and over and over again. I want to read a little story about forgiveness. This is from Adventures in Resilience, which is a 12 Powers book written by Sharon Connors. Myra Thompson radiated vitality that day. She felt on top of the world because after a lot of effort to become an ordained minister, she got word that she had gotten her license to preach. She was off to Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, to lead the Bible study group that evening. It was her first official act. She never came home. Neither did 8 others. Dylan Roof, a 21-year-old described as a white supremacist and domestic terrorist, came to her Bible study that evening. He was warmly welcomed. He listened to the sharing, disagreeing occasionally. And when the group went into prayer, he rose, pulled a Glock 45 caliber handgun from his backpack, and gunned down 9 African Americans point blank. How does Myra's husband, Reverend Anthony Thompson, forgive? he chooses to forgive. Reverend Thompson shared that he chose to forgive for his own freedom. He said, "When I forgave him, my peace began. I'm done with him. He doesn't have control of me." Reverend Thompson knows that resentment and hatred are not part of God. So this again is why forgiveness is a key to our prosperity. It's a key to our willingness to accept and live the will of God. Forgiveness means a lot of things to a lot of people, and it's really hard to do sometimes. I realized this last week, my oldest daughter was here for the week, and we got to talking about when she was 12, 13 years old. I'd been divorced from her dad for 6 years at that point, and she worshiped her dad, bringing up a lot of resentment from me because, of course, I was the responsible parent. I was the one who covered all the school costs and all the housing and all the food and all the, getting her to places, etc. You know the story, medical bills, whatever. And her dad was an electrical engineer. And so she got to go with him one summer when she was down there on summer break, summer visitation. She got to go with him and watch him doing a job. He was fixing an X-ray machine. And he took the panel off the machine, and inside were all these beautiful colored wires. They were so cool. And he knew exactly which color of which wire went to do which thing and how to plug them all in so that they made the machine work. And they were rainbows. And Wendy was so excited about learning how to do that she decided then and there she was going to be an electrical engineer. And she came home to Missoula and said, "I want to be an engineer like my dad." And I went, "Oh, shit." Excuse me. How do I handle this one? When everything in me tells me that this girl is not an engineer. She should do all kinds of other things, but not an engineer, for heaven's sakes. Well, I finally, after some work and some counseling with our minister and some more work and releasing and trusting in Holy Spirit, I didn't say anything. Wendy told me this last week, "Wow, Mom, you were so good about not saying anything bad. You just let me do what it, and even though I was like this with the whole idea." And finally, she said, "Looking at it now, I'm just amazed that you didn't know that I would be a good engineer, that my whole life was doing puzzles and figuring out how things connected and worked together. You never realized that." And I said, "You're right. I was so engrossed in the idea that being an electrical engineer was only because she was admiring her father and resenting and being angry at him, that I carried that with me for another 35 years, probably. That, gee, why was she an engineer?" And so finally, I was able to let go of this after so many years of, even though I thought I'd paid lip service to letting go and letting God guide my life and guide her life, I still had, you still have that little voice. If she'd only listened to me, she'd be, much happier. And so I want you all to think that perhaps there is a place in your lives where you haven't really quite let go, even though we think we've made the steps, we've done what's been asked for us, we're really trusting divine order in our lives, we're willing to listen, that there may still be this little tiny voice inside that says, but if they did it my way, they'd be much better off. I know, maybe nobody else but me does that, but so when we finally learn to do this stuff, we finally have step 1, tithing, step 2, setting clear goals, step 3, forgiveness. Then we need to move on to finding our divine purpose. And that's where we really, truly do listen. We really, truly do spend time in meditation and prayer and listen. Be willing to open ourselves. In the book, 12 Powers in You, Galen Williamson, one of the authors, talks about learning to really listen. Before I met my husband, David, I had chosen to be with people in my life that I thought would be good for me. I met with a fair share of hurt, pain, frustration, and upset. If this story I'm about to tell you had not happened to me personally, I probably would doubt its authenticity. But this really happened one day as I was sitting in church after the midweek service. There was a deep sadness in my heart. I was divorced, not in a relationship, and feeling a great deal of doubt about any future relationships in my life. As I sat in church, I was praying in a way I had never prayed before. I remember so clearly saying, God, I surrender. Tears flowed. God, I have done a poor job choosing people to be in a relationship with, so I surrender that to you. Tears ran hot down my cheeks. I thought of how important a good relationship was to me. I am a partnership kind of person. I work best in a team. I love the companionship and nurturing a good relationship can bring. I ended my prayer by saying, God, you choose. You tell me who my partner is and guide and direct me and direct my way. A voice behind me spoke and made me jump a bit. Before I could turn around, I heard, David Williamson. When I looked behind me, to my amazement, no one was there. I felt this incredible deep peace come over me. I really didn't know who David Williamson was, but I had this calm assurance I would find out in the right way and at the right time. Did I know him? Had I seen him somewhere? Had someone told me about him? How would I find and meet him? What is supposed to happen and when and where? But all I had was a name, mysteriously received in a moment of openness and humility. But then, through a series of wonderful synchronicities, we came together. So once again, just remember that when we let go and let the flow of life, the flow of God really work in our lives, amazing things can happen. Divine synchronicity, divine alignment. It's really marvelous. I don't know if I have time for one more story. Just about. So my daughter was here, my oldest daughter, our youngest daughter. As you probably know, my husband, Tom, is being challenged. We're being challenged with movement disorder that may be a form of Parkinson's. There's no total diagnosis yet, but it's gotten really very, very difficult for him to move very much at all, do anything. He's losing abilities, just even scooting his chair up to the breakfast table, needs a little bit of help with dressing these days. He's seems to be fairly content. Sometimes he gets into anger and resentment, and he'll be a little short-tempered. And sometimes he's an incredible spiritual teacher for me still. So last week with my daughters around a lot, trying to help with Tom and get him to PT and getting, all that stuff, they both started insisting that I should sign up for some in-home health care. That even though I have a woman coming in twice a week to help and a third person coming to clean house, and even though that's going on, I really need more help. And I've been reluctant to sign us up for an in-home healthcare service. And I finally told my daughter exactly why I didn't want to do that. And as I did so, she actually heard and said, "Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me." I said that one of the reasons was because we didn't really need the home health care people are wanting 6 hours a week for sure. And it's supposed to be on blocks of at least 3 hours. And I said, at this point, he just needs, somebody there in the morning, someone there at night to help him dress and undress. And I don't really want to pay the twice or 3 times what the home healthcare service is paying their employees to hire a healthcare service. I'd rather find somebody, come in to do it, and I can pay them directly. And my daughter went, "Oh, okay, that makes sense to me." Well, the very next day, I had an appointment to get my hair done. The woman who does my hair started out by saying, "Oh man, I just got some horrid news." She says, "I've had a housekeeping job for once a week for several months, and I just was told that she can't keep me on any longer." And I said, without thinking too much, "Gee, would you happen to be free on Fridays and you could come to my house and help on Fridays since I have people on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday?" And she said, "Well, no, Fridays won't work, but Mondays." So ta-da, ta-da, my problem is solved. Her problem is solved. And then she got a phone call from her ex-husband who has been living in her house, who has decided, ta-da, to start paying her rent. So her prosperity flowed, my prosperity flowed, and indeed we are aligned with divine will when we open our minds to let the goodness of God flow through us. Thank you for listening. So in closing, let's pray our prayer for protection. Affirmative version. Together, the light of God surrounds us. We are the light. The love of God enfolds us. We are the love. The power of God protects us. We are the power. The presence of God watches over us. We are the presence. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. We are one. So let's join hands on